Everybody, my name's Kirk Fox. We're at my shop in Washington, Massachusetts. I do a lot of architectural millwork, kitchen cabinets. I built this building, I think about 26 years ago, and I figured out a way to put all my machines in here where I can run 16-foot long boards in a machine and out of a machine. It may not seem possible, but it does happen. This is a 1910 New Britain chain mortiser, so it has a bar and chain setup. So when you clamp the board in, these flat belts basically spin the chain, raise this table raises up into the cutter. So when your piece of wood is clamped, you're able to make a mortise up to 6.5 inches deep. This is XL Smithway. This is a 2x6 molder. So currently it's set up for flooring. You run your stock through, it's typically 1/8 of an inch thicker and wider than what you need. But when it comes out the other end, we have a groove, we have a tongue, we have relief cuts on the back of the piece of flooring, and essentially we trim the end square, and you have a piece of flooring that you can nail down and install in a job. These two shapers here, they actually came out of a paintbrush factory in Vermont. So in the 70s, they literally made millions of paintbrush handles on these machines. This face and this face were actually bolted together, so the two spindles were very close, and they would take their pattern, something like this, and they could run on one side for the downhill, and then they could run on the other side. So they would have their templates where they were making their paintbrush handles. So with an exterior door jamb, what you're trying to do is you're trying to keep the elements out of a house, so the door typically fits into a rabbeted edge. So with my top jamb piece and my two side pieces, we're actually going to rabbet out material. I want to be able to put a piece of weather stripping in, and the weather stripping that I'm using is replaceable. If it gets torn or falls out for some reason, you can buy a new piece and stick it in. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to rabbet the edge of this. We're going to come over 2¼ inches and 1/2 inch deep. So now what we're going to do with this piece is we got to remove all of this. And we're actually going to do that on the jointer. So what we're doing is we want the edge of the knife to just miss where I did the saw cut. We're doing the saw cut because if we just did this with a jointer, it would tear the wood grain and the fibers and basically make a mess of it. So I'm going to drop the infeed table so that we're actually taking 1/2 inch of material off. So this is how we rabbet this. Now the next thing I need to do is I need to make a saw kerf on an angle here to hold a piece of weather stripping. This is kind of a weird blade that I got with a lot of other saw blades I bought. I basically use it for weather stripping. I put my information right on the blade. I'm only using this blade for doing exterior door jambs, and I put right on here, set the saw for 4 degrees. This is a piece I did earlier, and this is a section through of the weather stripping, and you can see how the weather stripping has like a little barb in it. So when you press this in, it's got like a nice snug fit. And then when we close the door, this weather stripping can flex to keep the cold air out and moisture. Okay, so that's how we do that part. These pieces, which I've already done on the back side, there's a few relief cuts. And what I was always told when I was learning the trade was that helps relieve the back of the board to help keep it from warping, cupping. So to do that, I'm basically just setting this off. I'm cutting, depending upon the thickness of my stock, between 1/8 of an inch and 1/4 of an inch deep. I set the fence 1 1/4 inches away from the blade, and we're just going to do simple. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to make a threshold. And basically, I just took a scrap piece of wood and I cut out the shape of what we're going to be making. I glued up some boards. I'm using white oak for the threshold. Unfortunately, I didn't have anything 2 inches thick by 9 inches wide. So what I had to do was I glued some boards up. This piece of pine I glued out here, this is just going to get machined off. This is only here to keep this level. There's going to be a couple of steps involved. So the finished shape, again, is going to be something like this. This part's going to be exposed to the elements, so it needs to taper down. So any water that lands on here will shed away. The other thing, I glued a piece on here because this rabbeted part, when this is in a house, this would sit on the flooring. Again, this is a traditional way of making a threshold. Typical doors that you're buying today at lumber yards, they don't quite have all these features. What they're doing is they're taking a piece of flooring and they're butting it up to the threshold. Well, if the flooring shrinks a little bit, or if the threshold isn't perfectly square in the doorway, you're going to have a gap. So this rabbeted edge allows the floor installer to have a little bit of wiggle room. So if the floor is going this way or this way, it'll tuck underneath there. So what I'm doing on this bottom side is I want to make this flat. I'm just going to take a light pass off of the whole bottom, and then this top surface we're going to run through the thickness planer to get the two parallel. We're going to do a 45-degree cut, and then from there we're going to make a saw curve, and just like the jambs, we're going to use the jointer to remove this material to actually do the taper. It's a pretty cool thing once we see how it's done. Exterior door is 1 3/4 inches wide. So from the edge of this over 1 3/4 inches, we're going to do a saw curve. And the saw curve, what we want to do is this particular board, I just want to go slightly below this so that when I do my tapered edge, you don't see a glue line of where the two pieces of wood come together. You can see with this, I put that chamfer right at the glue line for this, so it's less visible. What you'll see with this is our saw curve comes just below the line where the two pieces are glued up. So again, when I taper this, I'll have a nice transition. So now it's starting to take nice shape, so I can rip this piece of pine off now, radius this edge, and essentially that part of the threshold's done. Then the next step is to cut this so it fits our jamb. Even just a whisk around there. And in that way, I can go to my jointer and I can joint this edge off. You can see the glue line right here. So what I'll do is when I radius this edge, I can radius it right to that glue line, and then people are not going to notice it. But more importantly, outside, rainwater is just going to run downhill and drop off of this. So let me radius this edge. What I'm going to also do with this is I'm going to make a couple of saw cuts, saw curves to relieve the bottom of this. But more importantly, I'm going to put what we refer to as like a little drip line. We're going to put a small radius under here going the whole way. And what that does is as water comes off, if you ever watch water shed off of a building, it'll come down, but it needs to break away. So the water will actually wrap right around here, and then it will just cling there. But if we put that little radius groove, the water will actually break off of the piece of wood. Now you can do this cut with a shaper bit or a router bit the way I was taught. The shop I worked in, we had an old chipper, and we literally ground a radius on both teeth. You can see this other side, it's actually missing the carbide tooth, but if you look at this, there's a radius edge to it, and then I also radiused this side of it just on a grinder. It doesn't have to be beautiful, it just has to have that little bit of a curve. So you can see with that, it's just a little radius. So again, water will come off, it'll come underneath this, it'll hit that, and it has to break. So it's a 36-inch wide door. So I'm basically taking a 36-inch yardstick ruler and I'm centering it, and we're going to basically take out an even amount of material. So this is going to come right up to that bevel, a 45-degree chamfer. So this little chamfer, this line here to here is 36 inches for our 36-inch door. What I'm going to do from here is I'm going to come over 3/8 of an inch. Most people cut this part off, but when you trim out the interior of your door, your trim butts up against this, so it gets filled in. Something when you see the final door you'll understand maybe. Okay, so we got to cut this out, and this out, this out, and that out. So these are all the steps needed just to make the threshold. And I did that because this goes out to a porch, so it's not going to get the exterior weather that the other one will. So the side jambs are dadoed to fit this. You can see the little piece right here, so when the trim comes down, you'll have your reveal here, and your trim will come up to here. So this is So your trim would come up like this, creating your reveal. Then on the outside, if you look at the outside, you're adding your 1-inch exterior trim, so that gets a bevel cut on the bottom to match the angle of the threshold, and then you have a little bit of a reveal here, and that's typically how an exterior jamb looks.